Greetings and welcome to Week 3, Unit 1 on Taxonomies of Learning. In the earlier week, understood the nature of outcomes of engineering programs in India. We talked about program educational objectives, program outcomes and program specific outcomes and their importance and so on. And now we come to a situation where we have to have some kind of a structure for dealing with these outcomes. So in this unit, we attempt to understand what are taxonomies of learning. Word taxonomy means some kind of a classification. A taxonomy of learning is a framework that classifies educational learning outcomes into levels based on complexity and depth of understanding. That is a formal definition. We intuitively understand that all learning is not the same. Say, what is the distance from your home to the school? That is a specific piece of information. Or determine the sum of two numbers. That is another. That is not the same as trying to say what is the distance between your house and the school. So these two are two different types of learning that is required. Similarly, there are other types of learning. Taxonomy tries to look at, can I classify the learning in some way? But instead of talking about the entire learning, you talk about what are the objectives of education, let us say. Can I classify that? Though we use the word now outcome, earlier several decades ago people were using educational objectives or instructional objectives, words like that. So when you have because if every person understands these objectives or outcomes in their own way, then we cannot have any formal dialogue between two individuals. Especially in education, faculty should have the same understanding and the student should also acquire the same understanding. So a taxonomy of learning provides a clear framework for educators to design curriculum and assessments. Say straightforward, some kind of a structure that you want for designing your curriculum and assessments. It helps in crafting learning outcomes that develop different cognitive abilities. We will presently define what these cognition and cognitive abilities. It guides the creation of diverse assessments that target different levels of learning. See, my assessment, whatever I want to say, whether you have learned something or not, that should be in alignment with what you want the student to learn. You want him to learn something, but I test him for something else. For example, if you are training somebody to drive a car, and how do you test whether he has learned how to drive a car? Not by asking him how the carburetor works or what is the role of brakes. I cannot ask him a question like that. I have to ask him to drive in a given context or in a given complex traffic that we do have in India. So the assessment and the outcome will have to be in alignment with one another. For that, whether they are in alignment or not, we use the help of a taxonomy that we commonly agree upon. Using taxonomy of learning ensures comprehensive educational experiences. Okay. Now, there are several taxonomies of learning because people even today, they do not 100% agree how the taxonomy needs to be worked out or defined. To start with, we have Bloom's taxonomy. We have revised Bloom's taxonomy. and there is a Gagne's taxonomy of learning, which was popular several decades ago. Then you have solo taxonomy, structure of observed learning outcomes, that is solo taxonomy. Fink's taxonomy of significant learning, which is still being used by Professor Fink in some of the universities in USA. Then you have Marzano-Kendall taxonomy of learning of another kind, integrating more than cognitive dimensions. And then you have Gray-Pierce taxonomy of cognitive, affective and psychomotor domains, and many more. If you spend time, you will find at least one can come up with minor variations of this and sometimes significant variations of this. You may come up with 30, 40 such taxonomies. All may be performing satisfactorily in certain context, and one may have one's own preference for that. So we will present to you what we consider very popular and which can take care of all the requirements at a higher education level. Now, our preference is for revised Bloom's taxonomy, because there is one thing called Bloom's taxonomy and there is revised Bloom's taxonomy. Now, Bloom's taxonomy is where it all started. Benjamin Bloom was a professor of he's an educational psychologist. He was an educational psychologist, and at the University of Chicago, he was working with a group in early 50s, 1950s, in the development of specifications through which educational objectives could be organized according to their cognitive complexity. That was the goal. Like remembering the distance between the school and your and home, is it more complicated than, let us say, multiplying a 4-digit number by another 3-digit number? Okay. So, cognitively we consider the second one is more complex. So, can I order this complexity in some way? That was their goal, and that is when they offered a particular structure to this complexity. They propose that any given task favors one of the 3 psychological domains. Our learning first are classified into domains. One is cognitive, the other is affective, the third one is psychomotor, and we also add another domain later, we will presently see. But at the beginning in 1950s, they looked at cognitive, affective and psychomotor. These are the 3 domains. Let us see what these are. And the cognitive domain deals with a person's ability to process and utilize information in a meaningful way. That is, you receive some information, process it, and you produce something out of that. And in a meaningful way. I can produce in some arbitrary thing, but in a meaningful way. That is cognitive domain. The second one is affective domain. It relates to the attitudes and feelings that result from or influence and it will also influence the learning process. For example, if I am not in a mood, I had some problem at home, then I can't sit in a classroom and properly absorb what the teacher is communicating to me. Or if I had problem at home, the teacher may not be able to effectively teach in the classroom. Okay, so it has to do with feelings and attitudes. And the psychomotor domain involves manipulative or physical skills. For many activities, you require some physical skills, and how do I train myself? For example, in a chemistry lab, I have to use a pipette and I have to exactly measure certain quantity. Can I do it effectively? that requires certain physical skill, and sometimes it requires a lot of practice. For example, can I run 100 meters in let us say 14 seconds? You can't just like that and make it happen. It requires certain practice, sometimes coaching, and sometimes certain aids and so on. Any given task, if you take, tends to be generally dominant in one of these three domains. But all the three domains are present. Maybe in a reduced effectiveness or reduced importance, but all the three domains are involved because you are designed that way. Our brain is designed that way. All the three domains are present. This classification of the domains is only for our convenience at cognitive level, in fact. Okay. And the fourth one, we will add fourth domain, spiritual domain. We will have a chance to bring that also into the education, because the new education policy 2020 talks about certain holistic education where the spiritual domain also starts playing a role. We will talk about that later. Now, just to pictorially present, you can say this represents a dominantly cognitive activity. Okay, I hope you can relate the activity to dominantly cognitive. And you can also look at it as a dominantly affective activity. You can come up with your own interesting images of this kind. And then dominantly psychomotor, the level of skills that you can talk about are at the highest level, right, to perform this kind of activity. And now some kind of activities are integrated experiences. If you look at these activities, all the three domains are equally are present at highest levels. Cognitive, affective, and psychomotor activities, all of them are present at the highest level. And then what happens in a certain time, when you are in certain activity, the domain which is dominant in you can keep shifting with the time. For example, when you are writing your exam, 90-minute exam, first 85 minutes it is dominantly cognitive, but the last 5 minutes will become intensely affective and psychomotor type of activity. Okay, so it can happen that in a given period of time it is a changing domains. Now coming to the original Bloom's taxonomy, those of you who are interested, though the language may be slightly unfamiliar, but it can be still understood. It is referred to as handbook. It was published in 1956. It is called the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the classification of educational goals, because they talked about the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. So it is called Handbook 1 for cognitive domain. And this is now available online. One can download and take a look at it. Earlier it was available only in print form and very difficult to get and very expensive document. They identified cognitive levels called knowledge, comprehension, apply, analyze, synthesize, and evaluation. They use this terminology. We will not elaborate on this, but they have identified 6 cognitive levels. This was what is referred to as Bloom's taxonomy. If you Google Bloom's taxonomy, you are likely to get images, diagrams, and all kinds of write-ups which are related to this. but this is superseded already 25 years ago. So please remember that. Don't hang on to this. People associated with that have already moved on. No point in hanging on to this original taxonomy, but it was the best starting point. And a major revision of Bloom's taxonomy appeared in 2001. That is practically after 45 years of actual use, a committee got formed, and then they have talked to huge number of faculty or teachers right across the world, and people have been giving their continuous inputs to them, and took all that and they produced a book called Taxonomy for Learning, Teaching and Assessment. This was also initially was expensive book, but about 2-3 years ago it is now available for the public, and I strongly suggest all faculty should download this book and keep referring to it as frequently as you can. And that's why it is called Revised Bloom's Taxonomy. The only person that was common between this committee that wrote this and the committee that which produced is Professor Krathwohl. And in this revised Bloom's taxonomy, cognitive levels were ordered from simple to complex and from concrete to abstract. That is how they were ordered. And it was assumed that this order represented a cumulative hierarchy. That is, higher level in the hierarchy, higher level activity will include the lower level activity. I don't have to separately handle the lower level activity. And all these categories, these 6 levels that we see that they have given, they have also have several subcategories. In each one, they have identified several sub-processes or subcategories in the cognitive levels. We are only talking about cognitive domain. And what they have done, revised Bloom's taxonomy identified the 2 dimensions of the taxonomy. They identified there are 2 dimensions. To that extent, I cannot say orthogonal, but you have to deal with them separately. And this also gives you a little more natural expansion, which people were finding it difficult to write things in the original taxonomy. They always have limitations on that. But now it is much easier to write outcome statements in the 2-dimensional version of the revised Bloom's taxonomy. In any outcome statement or educational objective or instructional objective, there is some subject matter. Whether you are working in physics, chemistry or mathematics, there is some subject matter. And generally that subject matter is given as a noun or a noun phrase. And a description of what you want the student to be able to do on that content, on that particular subject matter. What is it that you want to do? So you have, and what you want them to do can be expressed through a verb or a verb phrase. Okay? So there is an activity and there is a content. For example, state Maxwell's field equations. Simple statement, which or any other law that you want to talk about. Maxwell's field equations, subject matter content, that is what it is, and that belongs to knowledge category. We look at the classification of the knowledge later. And then we say state. State is an activity, it's a verb that we are using. What is to be done with or to that content? You are essentially recalling. Somebody has stated the Maxwell's field equation sometime back in the classroom, and you are supposed to repeat that. That is, you have stored it in your memory and you have to recall from your memory and write it down. Okay. So, state Maxwell's equations, it has a verb and it has a noun. So, that is what it is, the two dimensionality of revised Bloom's taxonomy. In the beginning, what happened is they talked about three subcategories of knowledge: factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge and procedural knowledge, which are fairly easy to appreciate. They have identified later a metacognitive knowledge was added. And the importance of this fourth category was not realized well at the beginning of the handbook, but it is assuming increasing significance these days as more evidence from learning theories confirm its importance. We will spend more time on this. And if you want to spend a little time comparing the Bloom's taxonomy with revised Bloom's taxonomy, revised Bloom's taxonomy also has 6 categories of cognitive processes, but some changes were made. Renaming, the verb aspect of original knowledge category was named remember. Instead of they used the word knowledge, and that created all kinds of problems. Now it is replaced by the word remember, which is easy to understand. Comprehension was used, and comprehend was changed to understand. We will presently explain why it is so. And synthesis was changed to create. That is a simple change. And verb form, application, analysis and evaluation were retained, but were changed to the verb forms like apply, analyze and evaluate. Okay. Create was made higher in the hierarchy than evaluate. Earlier, evaluate was the highest category, and synthesis was the earlier category, next level, lower one. Now, create was made the highest level category. Now, the cognitive processes of the revised Bloom's taxonomy are remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate and create. So, these are the 6 levels that you have to get used to and completely internalize. You have to think and look at your content the way you want to do everything in terms of these 6 categories. The original group somehow avoided using the word understand because they found it at that time vague and they felt it was not easily measurable, and used word comprehension or comprehending. They used that. And they felt that understand word was a bit fuzzy. And they felt it did not represent some actionable process. But the revision committee decided after considerable deliberations to use the understand itself. The reasons for that are because the teachers, whether at school level or at higher education level, all the time use the word understand. You look at the students and ask them, did you understand that or not? We use that word so often, and many teachers objected to when that word itself was eliminated from the taxonomy. So what they have done is, after all it's a word, so you convert into an actionable one. So now the word understand means any of these 7 sub-processes. That's what they have stated. Though some people still want to hang on to the previous word comprehension, but in the current context it is meaningless to hang on to that. The revision committee found that it was the major complaint of most of the teachers against the original taxonomy. You did not use the word understand as a part of the taxonomy. That's why they were forced to do this. And there are 2 other words people also are very particular about: critical thinking and problem solving. and these two words do not find a part of the revised Bloom's taxonomy either. The reasons for that is they are addressed already within these 6 categories, which we will explain later. And another one, as we mentioned already, there is a hierarchy of cognitive processes. They are hierarchical in general, that remember is lower complexity than understand and so on. So, highest level is create. If you are doing create activity, it is implied that you are involved in all the lower 5 level activities. You have to remember things, you have to understand things, you have to you should be able to apply things, analyze things and evaluate things. Create activity will involve all of them. You do not have to separately keep writing all the previous 5 when you are talking of create activity. Sometimes the word understand or the activity, in some specific cases the hierarchy may not hold. For example, in specific case, explaining may be more complex cognitively than executing or applying. What it means is, you should always remember that this taxonomy is some kind of attempt to classify our learning. Maybe learning does not easily permit that kind of classification. So, we have to do the best that we can. To that extent, you can always find some issues when you are talking about the difference, let us say, between understand and analyze or understand and apply, which is more complex than the other one. You have to realize there are 2 words, complexity and difficulty. The apply is more complex than understand, but an understand activity can be more difficult than an apply activity. So, difficulty and complexity, they are 2 different dimensions. So, one has to look at that. We will visit that later. So, here what happens is, whenever you talk about some activity, teacher will have to use his or her discretion in arriving at proper conclusions. Depending on the context, you have to say, in this context this is to be considered like this, but this happens at the border, but it is not a license to do whatever you want. Okay. Now, we use some action verbs to write an outcome statement. To make an outcome statement, we use an action verb. Generally, it is practiced to start with an action verb. Action verb means what? Remember, solve, compute, some kind of activity like that, or analyze or evaluate. These are the activities you start with an action verb, any statement like an outcome statement. But a cognitive process cannot be determined blindly from the action verb, because we have our number of words that we have are limited. So, you are forced to use certain words, but you may have to use it in different contexts to mean different things. For example, compare is an action verb, corresponds to understand, but that action verb also needs to be used in the to state some analyze activity as well. So, a teacher will have to study the taxonomy in depth to properly use this terminology. After all, that is our profession as a teacher, so we are required to spend time. It is not an additional activity, because that is required by every teacher in his profession. The revised taxonomy has several advantages over the original taxonomy, as already noted. As we said, some teachers still prefer the original taxonomy to its revised version. That is because you are trained in that and you do not want to give it up, kind of thing. and you think that you have a better solution than this, it requires some effort to move on to the revised one. But however, in this course we use the revised Bloom's taxonomy and also strongly recommend to all teachers to move over to revised Bloom's taxonomy. So, in the next unit we will start looking at the cognitive process in detail. The first to remember and understand, we will be exploring the features of that in the next unit. Thank you very much for your attention.